Okay, so something kind of interesting happened, which is that I recorded this morning a sort of like an extra supplementary and session that was about the conclusion of the last hub of the fifth hub, and it's interesting that this has happened only 2 this might be the 2nd or the 3rd time it's happened, and it's usually when I'm recording something where I'm like, "I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be saying this," I guess. I don't know how else to put it. There's a sense where I'm like, "This is might be, like, too much of a disclosure," and also, it's a really fine line in this where I'm sharing things that relate to my process that are too personalizing, because ultimately what, my intent here and what this is really meant to do is to be a supplement to the book in your process. So and there, I think it was in the 3rd hub that there was a section where it was, like, pretty high voltage as I was reading it, I could feel that, and there was just the sense that it was like, "Yeah, this feels like something that you should opt in to read." There's something that's more of, like, being able to see it and make the decision to read certain things, and I realized that in this, there is a lot of this content that's very evocative. It is almost impossible to be exposed to this and in earnest explore it without it um, raising things. It's really powerful. And so also even in the diluted format that we have here, where this is now, hundreds of videos, it's like, this is how this needs to be. This is how this needs to be like dosed. And if you're doing this, you get it. It's not if there really is a physiological experience to this happening too fast. And so the thing that I want to point out before I dive in, because I am going to talk a little bit about the session that didn't record. And I don't know why it doesn't record. It has all the same mechanics. I've like rebooted it, the microphone's up. There's just kind of something that I don't know, that just it is, I don't know. I'm not gonna like get too into that in this format. But so what was I gonna say? Okay, so getting overstimulated in this, or so there's a couple things. One is the orienting principle of really coming back into yourself. Like, so I I think that another is I'm just gonna kind of like see what kind of like sort of arises in my thinking here. It's like one of them is to like, first of all, is to like slow down or like back out or take a pause or break. The other is to journal, is to process what's coming up. Certainly, if you have the capability or if you have the resources, therapy, someone to talk to, someone who's trusted can be a really important, especially in the early stages of this before the like internal validation of this starts to fortify. So in the early stages, there's actually still a lot of like the processing. Oh, I almost feel about like weird saying that even, but I'm gonna leave it at that. Um, let's see. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and another thing too with this is that every hub has tools associated with it. So when we're, having feelings of anxiety and anything that is related to physical insecurity, like fear for yourself, like anxiety, fear, in the first hub, those feelings, like money, like things where you're like money as it relates to your survival when you and even sometimes I'm gonna put a little note in that is sometimes, and for some folks who will be watching this that realize this, is once money is no longer like an actual um, literal issue, it can still present as one. Money's particularly great because it's abstract, so we can, kind of it can get reshaped as an adaptation to take the form of anxiety, which will be like, "Oh, if this ever were to happen to me, I wouldn't have enough money. If this ever happened to me, I could only survive this long and this and this and this and this and this." And so this kind of thing when it's like money will solve this, but there's no amount I can understand that's actually going to solve it. And it relates to my being able to be like housed, fed, my basic needs met. That's a first hub adaptation. And to be patient with it and to use tools. Look in the book, chapter 4, techniques and exercises. Touching grass, I love that expression that people use, being outside, grounding, a lot of the other practices there, really strong for that. Things with stuck emotions, like where emotions are becoming overwhelming, like this is something also where like movement, like physical movement, some of the stuff that was even in the fifth hub, techniques and exercises from the last reading, are helpful. For first hub, like, so actually I won't go through each of them. If you have the book, look in the techniques and exercises. The thing is, what we're getting into is the techniques and exercises are really about bringing consciousness into the way that we experience and manage, so like our lives, the way that we're living our lives and handling these, like, I guess handling it feels like the words, I'm not using the exact right words, but it's like the being able to just remain in sort of a like dynamic relationship with things that are arising, instead of just being like, I'm overwhelmed, I don't really understand what it is, or I think it's this, and displacing a lot of energy into something that is, just kind of a worn groove of an adaptation that's really familiar. And also recognizing that there's comfort in taking a familiar adaptation and reinforcing it because it's like familiar. It's like, oh yeah, no, I know how to like think about this, kind of a weird thing. So the one thing that I'm going to bring in from the reading, the session, I guess at this point, that I did this morning, that was like a summary, was, I'm gonna like put this, I'm gonna say I'm gonna spend 2 minutes on this, and then it's gonna be, yeah, and I'm gonna stop. Is what happened last night when I did the reading for the techniques and exercises for the fifth hub. I wound up doing the charging and discharging. So we were doing the charging and discharging in that session, and I kind of accidentally sort of like cast the spell for how to because at the end I was like, well, of all the hubs that we've done in terms of reading through this, my own process has not necessarily like experienced like a as kind of seismic and opening and expansion as the other hubs had, and I'd accepted that. And this was the thing where I said, look, it has, maybe we'll get to it when we on the descending, but that the thing was, it was like, look, so, there's been a lot of um, like consideration. There has been some consciousness, like whatever, but I was like, I can feel a block. I don't know what it is, and I accept that. Um, that's so that's part of how you get the answer for any question that you have, is asking it or presenting it without having an answer for it. The most important thing I can say here is that one of the things, the ultimate blocker of like resolving the whatever we feel right now, is the greatest obstacle for us to clear, is that we tend to think we know how to solve it and we just don't want to do it. It like really helps with this whole thing about like, oh, so I'm going to go over 2 minutes. So I'm going to take a little more time here. This is, like, there tends to be this thinking that's like, I actually know how to solve this and I'm just not doing it. And it supports the thing, which is like, I'm actually kind of lazy. I'm kind of a, like the whole thing about a divide. Like, there's this kind of, I'm in opposition with myself versus if you're on your side, you're like, yeah, if I know I want to do this and I'm not doing it, it's like there's another way to approach it. There's something else I need to know about this situation in order for me to proceed. And so I'm just going to really reinforce this is that the question asking is really about, so kind of what the, and it doesn't even need to be in question format, just needs to be like, okay, there's this thing and I'm real, and to have a receptivity to understanding and wanting to understand, but an openness to it. So not trying to control what it is. It's almost like it's less, it's a so I'm not going to say it's not the inquisitiveness because that part is really important. It's like the sense that there's receptivity, but the most important thing is that you're like, I don't know what the answer is, and you know, I'm open to it. It's kind of, so here's one of the ways to look at this is that trying to I don't want to take this for too long. I want to get into the sixth hub. So if there's any interest in doing a bit more of an exploration on this, we will go into this. This is really an important part of Parinama. It just happens that I did it and it happened in real time. And this morning I felt really compelled to sort of articulate it. It felt like it was out of integrity to have said like, oh, well, this didn't happen. And then it did. Apparently though, with the sound, it wasn't really meant to be communicated. So basically the thing is that, so I had kind of cast this spell to say there's a block and I don't know what it is. And then I'd been really receptive. I'd been like, look, it'll cut, it's like the receptivity, and I'd cleared a lot of space. And this involves not having a lot of sound or stimulation. So it's quiet. And like one of the other things is like being able to have space. This is like, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. Um, and to receive and allow. And for me, it came in the form of dreams. I had a very kind of long night of really, what's it called? What is it when it's like really vivid dreaming? That told me what the issue was that was blocking me. And so one of the things I'd struggled with this morning was like, how much do I disclose about this? Because it's like, I have a thing where I'm like, I don't talk about anything or disclose anything in this type of format unless I'm probably close to like 85 to 90% um, resolved on it, because I don't want there to be any activation in it, because people tend to come back to me and want to talk about it as it relates to them. And if I still have charge in it, then that will affect how defensive or how protective I feel about the notion in and of itself, and it'll impact the way that I'm talking to somebody else. So I don't disclose stuff. And there is the tendency, and people do this, like where they'll try to almost weaponize things, where they'll, where when they're feeling really activated, they'll take things and they'll say, well, this is this thing, and that you said about what you do, and which is fine, because the fact of the matter is, once I've taken the charge out of it, there's nothing that it can like do in terms of causing me any kind of harm, even when it's an attempt to be used like to, in that kind of way. So there's that. So the one thing I'll just say is that the block that came out, and it was like the way it was shown to me, the way it like is very six hub. So it's a great transition into this, because like it's very symbolic, and with a lot like dreams, like with a lot of the feeling behind it. And then it revealed to me this aspect of myself that was very like really young, like probably 13. So the upper range of, fifth hub development. And And it was about a notion I had, which was that if I could appear to be a conventional person and take on the trappings of the appearance of a more conventional life, the pain of my past would be absolved because I just didn't have the tools. And so it was, to see in the context, even with Parinama, of knowing the insideness of having the tools now, of being able to work through this. It was like I just saw, like I was just reaching for the only thing that I could make sense of. And one of the things that, as we're getting into fifth, sixth, and seventh hub, is like adaptations and holding patterns. They are there's strategies, and in the earlier ones they really just, they're very like behavioral, physical, like responsive, reflexive, and so they show up in the way that we're like moving and reacting and like are like reflexing in really like like linguistic ways. And now I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm realizing like as language gets on board and as more cognition in the prefrontal cortex comes on board, that what's happening is our strategies in terms of adaptations and holding patterns are actually starting to resemble strategies. So like more cognitive notions about like, if I could just do this, then everything would be, so it's like we're moving like in it's like the moving into things being more like conceptual. But in the fifth hub, what I like is experiencing that is still being like having this ephemeralness of not being like fully grounded into a concept, which is why I couldn't access it through like thinking. It like came out through kind of like a sense memory thing, which was realizing like where that had come from and how that was still vestigial and holding on to, like holding back important parts of my expression right now, which was this thing where it's like this strategy, I have to abandon it, but it's already like a husk. But like, and I won't get more into it. I mean, if you want me to, I will, but it is what it is for now. So anyway, yeah, so that's it for that. So okay, so I'm gonna see, we'll see how much we get into here, but this is the introduction into, here we are in the ninth chapter, boopity boop. And so this chapter is interesting. I don't think I want to talk too much about the production because I think it's gonna be boring for right now, maybe later. Is this was the different, okay, now I am. The sixth and the seventh hub, initially I would like, in the early days of this, I didn't understand the differentiation. And actually part of the process of like the whole thing for the years of working like 12 hours, 7 days a week for years on this, years, was really working through this and having my own practice and incorporating things from previous practices, working with people, using this and watching what happened, interviewing people, doing my research, and the creation of this. One of the things was understanding what was the difference between the sixth hub and the seventh hub. So it was like, what's the difference between, insight and curiosity, and then like thought and understanding. So we'll get into it. But here we are. We are at this place of insight and curiosity. And yeah, I really, these next two have a very particular quality to them. And in a way, I kind of feel like, sort of like, even coming into the fifth a little bit, sort of like we're traveling in a different land now a little bit, feeling that sense of passage. So what I want to talk about here is, so the heading here is the sixth hub is C. And I chose the word C because it has like multidimensional meaning, right? It's inner insight, it's outer, it's vision, It's like, you know, it's so it has a lot of kind of nuance in that. And this is the adolescence. So the stage of this is adolescence, and kind of the notion of it is self-reflection, reflection, self-reflection. And the quote, which I really love at the top of this chapter, is the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And that's Helen Keller. So the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. You know, and this was something through a lot of the support with my editor. We really did a lot with these, I think they're called epigrams or whatever, the chapter header quotes, and the importance of picking ones, because as I mentioned in last reading, the chapters really changed and evolved over time. There's an entire draft that contains as many words as this book contains. So it's really been through its own process to be kind of what it is right now. And that picking those would have to change because the actual chapter would materially change in terms of what it was pointing to. And so this is a good example of one that I think came on pretty late. This one came on pretty late. The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And I think something to mention right now is that we're getting into a separated state here, where we're getting into hubs that are for a great number of people are underdeveloped. And I'll leave it at that. It's like the thing with the fourth hub is the belonging, and even the notion of like that you complete me kind of thing, of like the separateness of yourself, really forming in terms of how that plays into how we view what a relationship with other people is and its meaning, really interferes with the safety that we feel, because it's like it's a splintering off of the sense of like I can only be whole if I'm belonging to other people. And so whether it's family, like being like, you know, the social kind of aspects of like romantic relationships, even like community groups, whatever, work colleagues, whatever, that this notion of like how much of myself do I have to hide in order to belong breaks off the thing of like, well, with yourself, there's the possibility of coming to the most complete level of belonging that there is. And that does not mean that you're separating yourself off from society, but it does, it actually creates a different notion of what like a fourth hub, or what would be typically considered like heart-centered or whatever, would mean. That And so if that's not stabilized, like speaking your truth is going to be really altered by trying to like make sure that you're not disrupting this notion of belonging. And this is where you also get into like tribalism and stuff that goes like deeper into like touching into like feelings of not feeling physically safe, not having full access to the like expansion of your emotions, not feeling like an individual. So in the fifth, sixth, and seventh hubs, we're in kind of a, you know, a sort of a, I don't know. This is weird. The thought that came to mind was no man's land, but that's not it. It's like it's a new place and it's not as shared. This is, and for good, I mean, for good reason, I'll say, you know, for good reason. There are folks, as we talked about in the first hub, who will actually like move out of like the development of their first hub, and actually like bypass into becoming like to sixth hub becoming overly developed. So becoming incredibly intuitive and observational. So this is an interesting hub as it relates to being developed in a particular way that is premature, and so as a result, the function that it plays is actually one of survival, and we'll get into this because we're gonna discuss biases and intuition. So there's this thing of, like, trust your intuition, but we're gonna go, like, one deeper on this to be like, look, this notion of intuition and being able to, like, watch for pattern recognition and to try to avoid danger, you when you're activating that at the same time that you're incorporating beliefs like social beliefs and societal beliefs, and familial beliefs, and there can be some passengers that get stuck in here. So the notion of intuition, this part of ourselves that we like absolutely trust completely, can have some blind spots in it that are kind of masquerades. I think it's almost like blindfolds, masquerades, masks, whatever. So, yeah, let's talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. So, I'm gonna do the overview in this one, and I don't know if I'm gonna get to reading because 'cause we're already kinda deep in, and I talked, a bit about the conclusion my conclusion of the 5th hub. So, let's talk about the structure of this. The learning about what the hub is, so the initial development will so this is like this is adolescence. So this hub is adolescence, and then the next hub is early adulthood, and the stage of adulthood that still is like in the first like cycle of life up until like being about 21 years old. So this is like sort of like into, late high school, like 13 to 17 years old. And so this has to do with a lot, so those think of the age 13 to 17 and about what's being formed in terms of individualized identity. Because you can even think about how in those ages, even as like, for American sophomore, junior, senior levels of high school, is that the maturation you see folks um more of a like a tendency that people start to become a bit more individuated, that kind of like glomming together. I mean, it's not, and this is another point, which is like it doesn't happen for everyone. You see some of this actually, like some people like really stay in these stages and not evolve. And I think one of the things with this is looking at that and understanding that this is, instead of like the vilification of these qualities, is like being curious about them. Like, instead of being like, oh, these assholes don't evolve, it's like, be curious. Like, that's my one thing is, anything that's like kind of the default that's like, well, it's shitty that they don't. It's like, you know, whatever. Okay, so understanding the hub is the initial development. We're talking for Americans is like high school. The basics of learning the hub are intuition and pattern recognition. So intuition is really like the hot take on this is definitely really more around what some of the underpinnings of intuition are, which is the amount of information that that we're taking in without consciousness, and that is, like, actually, I don't want to go into too detail on this because we'll get into it here in the reading, but it's like being able to tap into the ability to understand patterns, and some of the things that can wind up being actually limiting with intuition as a notion. Ideation, capturing inspiration, curiosity, looking and being seen. So, one thing that I think is really interesting about this hub, and especially working with like adolescents when I was writing this, was really like uh, noticing that this stage has a very interesting dichotomy of wanting to be special and not wanting to stand out. Like, there's a lot of like, "Oh, that's so embarrassing," but you wanna be special, and I think it's like when you think about, like, some of the blockbusters, like Twilight, and if you're familiar with that, it's like you've got Bella Swan, who is like, "I'm kinda unremarkable," like, it's just like, "I'm awkward," and, you know, um and just the universalness of this thing of, like, she's just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't even like, I'm clumsy and nobody notices me, and, like, I'm just, I'm just your, sort of average girl." And then this creature unlike any other who is, like, physical beauty beyond, he's, Edward the vampire, beyond comprehension, and, like, they've, and it's really, like, orchestrated pretty, like, they're also able to, like, access money, he's, like, rich, the book emphasizes how well dressed he is, he drives a Porsche or something, like, it's really, like, but he's also, like, extraordinary, and he's been lived all over the world and, had every choice forever, and he's 100 years old, and he's never, ever smelled such an exquisite, like, the Bella, the pull of Bella is that she is just so remarkable in this sort of, time expansive way. And so this thing where it's like that type of fantasy about being able to be both things at once is to be able to, like, not be exposed and seen, but also be, like, so seen. And I think that's one of the dichotomies. It's really using Twilight for this as an example is, like, actually, like, chef's kiss perfection, by the way. So pat on the back for that. But that's a huge part of, like, so of this. And then so some of the themes as we start to, like, look at the sort of more compound aspects of how this exists in the world is myth and meaning. So we start to get into, like, symbols and archetypes here. Um, Rite of passage, the hero's journey, dreams, memory, decision making, and overwhelm, too much information. So, and that's getting to know this hub. Here, the thing that's so this is I specifically point to the age of the sort of nervous system development around this hub, but, for reasons previously explored just a couple minutes ago, it's kind of like this goes into, this and the seventh hub have sort of like an extending into, you know the rest of our lives. So the interruptions and stressors for this hub, so we're talking about, like, what shapes this capacity, and I might even go a bit further than this, but I the ones so but and we'll see what gets what's written about. I don't per usual, I don't remember. I don't know how anybody could remember this entire book, including the author. So invalidation of intuition, ideation, and curiosity. Interruption and stressor is having your intuition invalidated, having your ideas scoffed at, and having your curiosity undermined or seen as a hassle. A hassle, and one of the things about our curiosity is, like, interruption in this hub is, like, when we have people around us who are either, maybe activated by the level of openness, who don't know the answers, so it makes them feel stupid, all sorts of stuff there. Another interruption is bad data, garbage in, garbage out. So it's taking in, people talk about, like, your diet is what you consume. And this is like, especially in this age where the brain is still, like, the nervous system rather is still wet clay. It's like the stuff that's coming into it, the ideas, uh, the visuals. I mean, I even find that I have a weird thing where it's like there's a kind of physical Americana beauty that feels like stamped into my like my sensibilities, which is, I pay attention to, and we'll talk a bit about, like, how we work with that. Um, yeah. Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Okay, adaptations and holding patterns. So this is like the characteristics of balanced and out of balance sixth hub. So shrinking, inflating. This is a really interesting one to me. So some of the holding patterns are imaginary audience, pattern recognition versus emotional literacy. E- I'm glad that that's in here too. The shadow is denial, illusion, delusion, and biases. So cognitive biases organized by hub. So there's quite an exploration here. We're going to spend time getting into, which is biases, which are like reflexive subconscious beliefs about how things work that can, because they're not arising out of what feels like cognition, and they are belief systems and they are like responses to things, that it's exploring the difference between something that's programmed into us as a adaptation versus like a naturally arising intuition. We'll talk about that. And then tips for critical thinking. We'll get into it. We're going to get into it. This is a good chapter. It's a good chapter. It's good. And so techniques and exercises. So tuition, intuition, insight, and imagination, decision making, ideation and dreams, curiosity and looking, assuming positive intent, visual boundary, and charge and discharge. It's interesting. Those headers aren't like super descriptive. It's just like words. Well, we'll figure it out together. We'll get there. So, yeah. So I'm really into these shiny stickers right now on my desk. Look. They're so pretty. Look, there's this one too. So wrapping up here. Yeah, I'm not going to read the first paragraph. I'll plan to do that tomorrow. I want to go back. I want to end on this point about so it's kind of like start where we ended, which is I want to end on the point about this this notion of inquiry, of having your questions answered, and that springing from a space of curiosity with a very specific notion, like even some of the notions without having the thing that's like, yeah, I know how to do it, but I don't want to do it. It's like, that's not really it. There's a way to do it. And this is one of the things where, like in the sixth hub, we're opening, it's like this capacity, this thing that's like, I have all the inputs already. And all I have to do is, like I form reality out of just continuing to like reorganize the inputs or use the information I have. Like, yeah. And so this is about like, it's like, okay, part of what we're doing is we're really getting interested in things that are beyond our current comprehension. So that's what curiosity is like we're really trying to look at things not as validating points to create security. And this is why we need the lower hubs, is we're actually feeling secure enough that we can open our aperture and start taking in information. Maybe there's like a little, sort of like alien standing there in the corner of your periphery. You're like, there's no aliens. Like, it's really like, I don't know where that came from. Maybe I've been watching too many TikToks or something. But like this kind of notion that like the solution and the answers, there's something there's more. There's more. And one thing that we're doing, and this was an analogy I actually did see on a TikTok today that I thought that really captured something really important here, which is that as we ascend, as we're doing the ascending hub, where we're working through, hub by hub by hub, and coming to a, like, self-actualization, and being able to like feel and see and know. Yeah, I guess it'd be like feel, see, oh, whatever. um that we're losing. So the analogy is a kite, and one of the things about a kite is that if you've ever flown one, this is a physical sense that you have, which is like you're just catching wind. And the kite kind of goes where it's going to go, and you partner with it. But there's winds that come and pick it up and hold it up. And it's really a lot about this feeling of being like, I've got the wind in my kite, and trying to keep it like in rhythm with the wind, and that the wind is essentially doing the work of holding the kite up, and that kind of partnership of being able to sail would be a one too, but I like kite because you have the feeling in your hands, and there's a sense of like catching, and like there's like the effort of it exists, but it's also has an effortlessness. You're not holding the kite in the air. You're not, it's there's just this thing where you're in this dance with it, and you catch it, and it gets this power, and you kind of work with it. And that's one of the things that is achievable in this, when we reduce the notion of like the things that feel like they're directing the kite are like fear and shame and isolation, and whatever, like those things having a lot of grab, when we can actually start to, because we're clearing that out so that we can sense what's arising in our integrity and catch that. Like, it's like you catch it, and then there's this effortlessness in terms of being able to, like, exist in your life and be able to, like, live live fully, live in this, like, expanded capacity that just keeps opening up more. It's just like, and that it's like in that feeling, there's a feeling of buoyance. It's not even like opening up more. It's just kind of it's feeling what was always already there. And like the sort of ecstasy of the release of it, and the kind of that kind of gentle surfing ride of it. So I don't think I did a good job. Her name is Keisha. And if you want her handle, just ask. I don't, I'll put it in the comments. But yeah, it was really good. And I didn't do nearly as good a job as she did of describing it. So anyway, so that is it for today. Thank you again. And I am so grateful for you. We're in this together. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. All right. Until then. Bye.